readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire Books, and today I'm reviewing The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. So this is another book that I've chosen to read because it was on the Booker Prize shortlist, and this one was super interesting. So The Shadow King is set during the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy back in the 30s. And then it's also got pieces that are in the 1970s when some characters from the book are meeting up again. The true heroes and main characters of this book are Hirut and Aster, who are these two women who have this weird love-hate relationship with each other because of the society that they come up in. But they both distinguish themselves as female fighters during this war, which is something that Mengiste got very interested in when she was researching for the book. So Aster is this wealthy woman who's married to Kidane, who is an officer in the Ethiopian army. And Hirut is their servant, who is basically not being treated very well, even though her parents knew Kidane, and Kidane had some sort of special relationship with Hirut's mother. So Aster and Hirut have this abusive but also symbiotic relationship with each other that is really interesting to track throughout the book, and they both distinguish themselves in these really interesting ways. So they inspire the army, they gather the women to help the war effort, and what's really cool about looking at this particular war is that even though for all intents and purposes Italy should have won this one, they didn't. In the end, the Ethiopians triumph, and it is without a doubt due to the help of the entire population, not just the men. There are also some Italian characters that we track. So there's this really gross sadistic colonel, and there's also this photographer named Ettore, and they just call him Photo because he takes pictures, and he is documenting the atrocities that the Italians are committing. And he does this at first because he wants to just be on an adventure documenting this war, and then later he's doing it because he has to. And a lot of the story is very much about memory and the things that he captures. And that's where I think the novel is very artistically interesting. So memory figures very strongly throughout The Shadow King. You have all these references to classical stories, so this idea of epic comes through, and the women become these folk heroes. There are songs about them. There are songs about their work with the Shadow King, who is actually just this peasant who looks a whole lot like Haile Selassie, who was the emperor of Ethiopia at the time. So they basically have this fake emperor that they're taking around to galvanize the people, and Hirut is one of his bodyguards. So they become the subject of all these folk songs, and stories are told about them, and they're remembered in their society in specific ways. And then there are also memories that are brought into the story through little reflections on photographs that Ettore has taken. And these different types of memory interweave in really interesting ways. And the kind of stories that we create around images, whether they're photographs or whether they are folk images that we're passing around orally, all of that stuff kind of comes into this novel in ways that I think are interesting and very profound. I think that Hirut is a worthy heroine who I really enjoyed reading about, and I just thought so highly of this book. I also thought that it did a really good job of bringing to life, I think, an underappreciated historical period. So I think a lot of us forget that, colonial powers did some really trash stuff in the 1900s, and it wasn't just all about World War II. So getting some focus on this war and on a particularly interesting aspect of the war, the female fighters, really meant a lot to me as a reader, and I liked it. It also interestingly plays into my own life in a way that, you know how you learn things and then you never make the connection until later? So when I was applying to grad school, I ended up studying Coptic, which is an Egyptian language, and looking at Coptic monasticism for my dissertation. But at one point, I was very interested in maybe learning Ethiopic or Ge'ez, which is another ancient language in which a lot of interesting ancient Christian texts are written, and those texts were translated and composed in Ethiopia. And when I was looking at graduate programs and I was touring programs, one of my potential advisors said, oh, well, if you want to learn Ethiopic, I'm sure that we can get you funding to go to Italy because the Italians have great programs in Ethiopic and you could go study it there with the people who are really good at it. And I never thought about it other than just to kind of internalize, oh, the Italians really like to study Ethiopic, until I read this book and I was like, oh my God, that's why. That is the enduring connection between a would-be colonial oppressor and the nation that they tried to take over. And I really appreciated getting a chance to see this from a more Ethiopian perspective and to cheer for Hirut and for her people instead of just seeing it from an Italian perspective. And there are other themes that come in through the book, themes of family and parents and, you know, who you are being who your parents are and the stories that you can tell yourself about yourself. And it all comes together in this really satisfying package. The only reason I gave this book 4 stars instead of 5 is that I do think that at times some of the imagery and the connections are very heavy-handed. The book is very dense, sometimes in ways that I didn't think were necessary, and sometimes in ways that detracted from my enjoyment of a really exciting narrative just a bit. But overall, I think The Shadow King is an excellent book. I can 100% see why it made the Booker shortlist. I'm so glad that I read it, and I really think that everybody should give it a shot because it is both a compelling story and a really thoughtful reflection about a period in history that is underappreciated and that shouldn't be. So that's my thoughts on The Shadow King. If you enjoyed my review, please do like and subscribe to my channel. And regardless, happy reading.